There are bad roster decisions, and then there are decisions so fundamentally backwards that they make you question whether the people running a franchise actually watch basketball. What the Indiana Fever just did falls firmly into that second category. They had a 6'4" shooter with a 7-foot wingspan sitting on their only developmental roster, a player perfectly built to complement the most exciting passer in women's basketball, and they let her walk. Not because they couldn't afford her, not because another team outbid them in some complicated sign and trade. They let her walk because they chose to keep a 32-year-old backup center who averaged 3 points per game and 1 rebound in the playoffs. Let that sink in for a second. The reigning champions just called the Fever's bluff, and Indiana folded without even looking at their cards. This isn't just frustrating, this is the kind of decision that defines franchises. It separates organizations that are serious about winning from organizations that are comfortable existing in the orbit of a superstar without ever doing the hard work required to actually build something around her. And for Fever fans who have been screaming all season about floor spacing, about perimeter shooting, about giving Caitlin Clark the supporting cast she deserves, this one has to hurt in a very specific way. Because the answer was already there, it was already in the building, and they showed it the door. Let's start with exactly what happened, because the timeline here is damning on its own before you even get into the basketball arguments. On January 14, 2025, the Las Vegas Aces filed an offer sheet for Justine Paisu, who had been sitting on Indiana's developmental roster throughout the season. Under WNBA rules, the Fever had 24 hours to respond. All they had to do was promote her from the developmental contract to a standard roster spot. That's it. One decision, one move, that costs them nothing extraordinary and keeps a young, high-upside player in their system. Instead, they declined. According to reports from WNBA transactions reporter Chloe Peterson, Indiana officially chose not to counter the Aces' offer sheet. The reason? To retain Demiris Dantas, a 32-year-old center, 3 points per game, 1 rebound. That was the trade-off. That was the calculation someone in that front office made and apparently felt good about. Paisu is now earning $150,000 for the remainder of the season playing for the best team in the WNBA. The week before, she was making $700 a week in Indiana. The Fever didn't lose a roster battle here. They lost a values battle. They showed in the clearest possible terms what they prioritize, and it isn't winning. To understand why this decision is so maddening, you have to understand who Justine Paisu actually is and what she brings to the floor. At 6 feet 4 inches with a 7-foot wingspan, she isn't your typical developmental prospect hoping to carve out a role as a bench piece. Her physical profile alone is something teams spend years searching for. She has the size to play and defend on the wing, the length to disrupt passing lanes and contest shots without fouling, and the shooting range to pull defenders all the way out to the three-point line. She can pull up from 25 feet, she moves without the ball intelligently, she can finish through contact when defenders close out too aggressively, and she does all of this without needing the ball in her hands to be effective. That last part is critical. In modern basketball, both in the WNBA and everywhere else, the most valuable complementary players are the ones that make your best player better without requiring the ball to do it. They create space, they punish rotations, they force defenses to make impossible choices, help off them and give up a wide-open three, or stay attached to them and leave driving lanes wide open for your primary ball handler. Paisu fits that profile almost perfectly. She is exactly the kind of player you build around a generational passer, and Indiana had her under contract for $700 a week. The Aces recognized that. Indiana, apparently, did not. Here's where the Caitlin Clark conversation becomes unavoidable, because everything about this decision connects back to her and what she needs to reach her full potential at the team level. Clark is already one of the best passers in the history of women's basketball. She sees the floor in ways that most players simply cannot. She can thread passes through traffic and transition, find shooters in the corner off the drive and kick, hit cutters without looking, and generally make everyone around her better when they give her the right environment to operate in. The problem is that environment has to actually exist for any of that to matter. Watch any Indiana Fever game from the 2024 season carefully and you'll notice the same thing in broadcast after broadcast. Defenses simply don't respect Indiana's perimeter shooting. They collapse. They load up on Clark in the paint. They dare the role players around her to beat them from three, and more often than not, those role players can't. The result is Clark operating in a crowded paint against triple teams, while her teammates stand at the three-point line as decoration rather than threats. That is a roster construction problem. It isn't Clark's fault. It isn't a matter of her needing to figure something out individually. The team around her isn't built to maximize what she does, and that falls entirely on the people making personnel decisions. Paisu resolves that problem in a way very few available players can. A 6'4" shooter who can pull from deep forces her defender to follow her out to the perimeter. That immediately opens up one driving lane Clark didn't have before. When defenses have to honor Paisu's shooting range, the help rotations that have been suffocating Clark all season start to break down. The math changes, the floor opens, and Clark, being the passer she is, will find those gaps instantly. The Fever had that player. They chose to let her go to the team that has already won 2 championships in a row. It is genuinely difficult to overstate how backwards that is. What makes this situation even harder to digest is that the Fever's failure with Paisu didn't start in January. It started in the preseason. And what happened there tells you everything you need to know about how this organization approaches roster development. During the exhibition slate, Paisu appeared in exactly one game, a matchup against the New York Liberty. She played 3 minutes. In those 3 minutes, she scored 10 points, pulling up from deep and moving off the ball with the kind of offensive fluidity that immediately stands out to anyone watching. She was showing precisely the type of mobility and shooting ability that modern basketball rewards, and anyone paying close attention could see she belonged on a real roster. Then she never played again in the preseason, not a single minute in any other exhibition game. Think about that for a moment. You have a young player who just went out and proved in 3 minutes that she can produce at this level, and your response is to pull her off the floor entirely for every remaining preseason opportunity. The explanation that has circulated since is as troubling as the decision itself. The Fever were reportedly trying. Is not getting better. At whatever age Paisu is, she absolutely was. Indiana chose the ceiling over the floor and called it wisdom. The deeper and more disturbing reality here is that this wasn't an isolated mistake. If you step back and look at the Indiana Fever's organizational decision-making over the past few years, a pattern emerges that should alarm any fan who actually wants to see this team compete for a championship. The way they handled the Kelsey Witchell situation raised questions. Their coaching hires have been debated extensively. Their draft strategy, their free agency approach, their development philosophy, all of it points to a front office that is either not equipped to build a championship contender or not genuinely motivated to do so. And when you're the team that drafted Caitlin Clark, the player who might be the most culturally significant figure in women's basketball history, the cost of that organizational dysfunction gets significantly higher. General Manager Amber Cox has not been forced to answer hard questions about these decisions publicly. The press conferences, the statements, the organizational messaging has all stayed carefully in the lane of trust the process, appreciate our veterans, believe in what we're building. But what exactly are they building? They were swept in the first round. They let a perfect complementary player walk to the reigning champions for nothing. They kept a 32-year-old backup averaging 3 points in the playoffs. If that's the process is broken. At some point accountability has to enter the conversation, not as an attack, but as a basic expectation that a franchise with a generational talent at its center owes its fans and that player a coherent plan to actually compete. The questions that deserve real answers are straightforward. Why did Paisu only play 3 minutes in preseason? Why was she never integrated into the regular season rotation, even briefly, to evaluate her? What is the genuine basketball justification for choosing Dantes over a young player who clearly has WNBA level ability? These aren't unfair or unreasonable things to ask. Any competent front office should be able to explain its personnel decisions with basketball logic. The fact that those explanations haven't been offered clearly and publicly says something about the organization's confidence in the answers. Now, consider all of this from Caitlin Clark's perspective, because eventually that conversation becomes impossible to avoid. She is the biggest star in women's basketball. She just completed one of the most remarkable rookie seasons in WNBA history, carrying an undermanned roster to relevance through sheer individual brilliance and making the league appointment television in the process. She did everything right. She showed up, she competed, she elevated the entire organization's profile, and she gave the front office every possible reason to invest seriously in building something around her. And the front office's response to that? Their major off-season move was to let a perfect complementary player leave for free because they wanted to keep a 32-year-old averaging 3 points in the playoffs. If you are Caitlin Clark and you watch that happen, what conclusion do you draw? How do you not start wondering whether the people making decisions around you are genuinely committed to putting you in a position to win? How do you not start doing the math on how many peak years you have, and how many of them are going to be spent carrying organizational dysfunction on your back? These are exactly the kinds of questions that eventually lead players to ask for trades. These are the doubts that accumulate over time until a superstar decides that loyalty to an organization is a one-way street they can no longer afford to walk. The Fever front office should be thinking about that every single day, and the Paisu decision suggests they aren't. Meanwhile, Justine Paisu lands in Las Vegas and walks into almost the opposite situation in every meaningful way. The Aces have won back-to-back WNBA championships. They have Aya Wilson, who is virtually certain to win another MVP award, giving Paisu an immediate example of what elite professionalism and competitive excellence looks like up close. Their coaching staff is among the most respected in the league. Their front office clearly understands how to evaluate talent, build rosters, and develop players. They just proved that by identifying Paisu while she was being hidden in Indiana and moving decisively to get her. She goes from $700 a week to $150,000 for the remainder of the season. She goes from 3 minutes of preseason action to real minutes on a championship-caliber team. She goes from an organization that didn't value her to one that went out of its way to acquire her. In 2 or 3 years, when Paisu is a genuine rotation piece on a winning team and potentially a part of another Aces championship run, Indiana fans are going to remember January 2025 very clearly. They are going to remember that their front office had this player, recognized that the Aces wanted her badly enough to file an offer sheet, and still decided she wasn't worth a standard roster spot. That memory is going to be painful, and it should be, because it was entirely preventable. The Fever had options at every stage of this process. They could have promoted her at any point during the season. They could have used her in rotation to build her value and evaluate her fit alongside Clark. They could have matched the offer sheet when the Aces came calling. At every decision point, they made the wrong call. The hardest truth for Fever fans to sit with isn't just that they lost a good player, it's what the loss of that player reveals about the organization's philosophy. There is a meaningful difference between building a team designed to maximize Caitlin Clark's generational talent and simply having Caitlin Clark on your team. The first requires difficult decisions, uncomfortable roster moves, a willingness to let go of familiar veterans in favor of younger players who fit the system better, and a genuine strategic vision for what you're trying to build. The second just requires drafting her first overall and hoping she carries you somewhere by yourself. Everything the Indiana Fever have done suggests they are operating on the second model, while telling themselves and their fans they're doing the first. A franchise that was serious about building a championship contender around Clark would have seen Paisu for what she was, a developing asset with the exact physical and skill profile to make their best player more dangerous, and protected her accordingly. They would have given her real opportunities, built her into the rotation, and made her a part of the long-term plan. Instead, they hit her in the preseason, ignore her during the regular season, and then watched her leave for Las Vegas without putting up a fight. That isn't bad luck. That isn't a cap situation.